Okay, thank you to the council members for seeing me this morning. Appreciate it. I'm here to present, I think you have letter in front of you, a draft letter in front of you relative to your support for the county's application to the Montana Department of, to the US Department of Transportation in their RAISE program. We are trying to do some reconstruction work on Lower Moise Valley Road, the first 1.36 miles or so from the trestle, all of Dublin Gulch and North Reservoir Road. Last year, when you signed a letter of support, we had included Claremont Road. We are substituting North Reservoir Road for Claremont Road in this year's application. We did not get funded, although it was scored at the top of the list. We were not awarded the funding, and it was for about $11 million. This year will be about the same. The issue that we are struggling with to determine is we would like to widen North Reservoir Road by a couple of feet so that we could put a bike lane along it. We're having problems doing it. Thank you, Carol. We really do want to support that, but the cost benefit analysis in doing it is a struggle that the engineers are coming up with to do it. We've got it's within the easement and it would not be any physical construction problem. The problem is whether or not we can get the added $700,000 into the grant application that it would cost. At this point, the application process, because it is on the reservation, all three projects are on the res, we qualify for 100% funding of the project. And I'm happy to answer any questions you've got about what we are trying to do with upgrading the roads.
Go ahead, Lynn. Anita and then Carol.
Thank you. Yeah, anybody who's driven them roads lately, it is like a roller coaster. The roads are coming up and it hasn't even got the spring thaw yet, and they're breaking up and you're just diving from one end of the road to the other. In some ways, I hate to fix them because the river crowd down there has absolutely no respect. They're driving them roads doing 70, but this is actually the main road. But they are horrible. I mean, you're just diving and ducking and you go to miss one bump and hit 5 and it's horrible. But I appreciate you putting in for the grant and trying to get those roads repaired.
Thank you, Councilman Knapp. I think, as we know, the road issues are very challenging. And I mean, the county would really love to be able to do all of Moise Valley Road, but there just isn't the funding, and perhaps in the future there can be a way we can combine resources to do that one. But the way those roads were originally constructed, as you know, was on basically substrata soil and put some gravel on it and make it do, and then add some chip seal to it that breaks up during the spring. So we are looking for paving those roads, which will reduce, of course, the county's costs on maintenance as well as providing much more surfaces. And we're trying to address right now the alternative routes that can, especially for commercial transportation, i.e. the connection between Back Road and Highway 93, North Reservoir Road, and Dublin Gulch Road, which when Highway 93 is, and if we do end up proceeding with the 9 pipes, the directing traffic around, you know, those whole areas of construction, or if there is an accident, it requires commercial carriers to take the long way around, backtrack, go all the way around up through 200 and then on 212 to come around to get around any stoppages, which is just adds to emissions and everything else in terms of the gas that they use, and so it's a real problem on those connector roads if we can't connect, at least get those into some kind of shape.
Thank you, Billy, and thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the council. Billy, thank you for your efforts in applying for this grant. Just knowing the fact that many of our roadways here on the reservation need work, and I was just kind of curious to know what your process was to determining on working on these particular roads.
Right, two of the things, when, as you know, I believe we worked together on the first iteration of the Tiger Grant when we rebuilt Skyline Drive. You know, it is looking at those roads that carry the heaviest traffic commercially and for residential traffic. So Road Superintendent Jay Garrick goes through a prioritization. We are just completing our community infrastructure, our capital infrastructure plan for the county right now. So he has gone through and kind of prioritized roads relative to what could potentially be paved. We can only do paving with grant dollars. We just don't have the funds to do anything but chip seal, some chip seal, and maintaining the gravel roads. There's like 1,200 miles of roads that we're working on. So Jay really based on two priorities, which are also the U.S. Department of Transportation guidelines at the moment for rural transportation routes, is what is likely to impede the delivery of goods and services as well as people in the safest way. And so using these connecting routes has been the highest priority the county has set relative to that, so that we can keep commercial traffic off our myriad of gravel roads as they try to find their way when there are shutdowns or whatever. So Jay sets those, and he has just gone through a process of prioritizing both for paving long-term over the next 5 years and for upgraded chip sealing, and then of course the regular gravel maintenance.
Okay, well, thank you, Billy. I really do appreciate that. And Mr. Chairman, I'd make the motion to approve the letter of support.
Carol, did you have an item? Okay. There's a motion by Len to approve the letter of support, second by Anita. Any discussion? I have a discussion point. So Billy Lee, I know that we want to work together and support, and I know the tribe supported the last application for this. I'm not sure if we're in conflict with our own roads program for any applications for the same funds, so I would want to make sure that we are okay with that.
Oh,
Because
absolutely.
Our goal would be to bring as much money in, no matter who it is, and if we work together, that's makes this stronger, but we don't want to be competing against each other.
Chairman McDonald, absolutely. You know, and I think if, you know, Scott, of course, has already given his approval. He's still writing the letter. We're trying to kind of do some wordsmithing relative to how it affects the empire and the climate policy, all of those kinds of things. So the more we can do, we were considering resubmitting to the Rural Routes Project, the same application. But I don't think that that's at all in conflict. If we do, as I say, the request last year reached the desk of Mr. Buttigieg, but however they prioritized it in his office, we were not funded last year. But I would totally agree, and we would be totally supportive of any applications that that Scott is putting in relative to the Rural Routes project. It's a great new funding source, so absolutely.
What, Billy, what is the deadline for this?
This one is the 12th of April. I plan on uploading it on the 8th.
12th of April.
It should be reviewed by contracts and grants. You didn't do that yet, did you?
No, this is not our submittal. This is.
I know, but this will answer the question that you have about us either in the process of applying for others or maybe something coming up.
That's true. I guess it would, if they have it.
If I may, though, I don't see how they would possibly be in conflict because you're not addressing probably county roads in that application. So there would be no conflict. I'm assuming you would not be without having talked to the county, submitting an application on county roads.
That was my discussion point, so.
But absolutely, if you guys are considering an application into this, if you guys want to call me, I'm happy to, sit down and get Jay and Scott together and whatever, and figuring out what that is and how we could be mutually supportive of it.
Thank
On-
you, Billy Lee.
Dublin Gulch, I know that we're already working, because we're going to try and put a bridge over the Post Creek area that's always flooding into that area. It's not feasible. We'd love to put a bike lane along that too, but it's just a road that's going to be really difficult to put a bike path on. But we are going to try for North Reservoir. But as I say, if we can make the cost benefit analysis work.
I am so happy to hear that you're trying to put a bike path on everything. That is, especially these high
Yeah.
volume roads.
Yeah.
That's really critical. We just, of course, had a bike accident, death this
Yep,
this past
heard about
weekend.
that, yesterday. And Scott's still writing his letter of support for it. And I sent him a note this morning to ask him to add into it if the tribe as a whole is trying to add bike paths, and that is kind of an overall statement. If he could add that into his letter on the road conditions piece, that would be really beneficial. It's kind of late to add it into this one. I only found out about the conflict yesterday. So.
Any other discussion? Motion to approve the letter in support of the RAISE grant program. All those in favor? Unanimous? Thank you, Billy Lee.
Thank you.
Talking about roads, look who's here. Come on up. Good morning, welcome.
Good morning. Thank you for having us again.
Just seems like you were here.
I know.
Check on
Hopefully
what's
it's
going
not a
on.
bad dream. Hopefully it's like a good thing.
You brought Bob along.
I
Well-
barely got here in time.
Well, good. It's good to see you. Thanks for coming.
So if you're ready, I can go ahead and introduce the group that we have here today. So this, today we wanted to talk to you in more depth about the 9 pipe study that we have going on. So we've got Bob Vosen, District Administrator, Jacqueline Smith, pre-construction engineer for MDT. We've got Sarah Nicolai with Robert Pesce and Associates. She's one of the people leading the efforts for the study. And then we've got Vicki Cernich, also with MDT, and she is the planning project manager for this study. And did you have anything you wanted to add? Okay, we'll go ahead and I guess there's a slideshow that we have. Do you have a thumb drive too if you need that? you see it? So, well, I do see that there's this one, but that was just the follow-up from Tuesday. We have a, oh, do I need to just scroll through? Thank you. Can everybody see that okay? Okay. Sorry. I did want to just also expand more on why we're doing this study. So we've had a few meetings with you in the past, tribal council, and it's been very clear that there's a strong desire to complete the rest of the 93 reconstruction, and we also share that feeling as well. The challenge is that there's just not enough money to do all the needs we have, not just here, but within the district and the state. And so we decided to move ahead with at least getting a study going so that we could help mitigate some of the risk that usually gets bid in later with the contractor, and also just better prepare us and position us to apply for grants, which is something that CSKT is also working on. So we're really hopeful that with the completion of this study, and even just now developing it, that we're better positioned with risk mitigation and trying successfully to get a grant to fund the rest of the 93 reconstruction. So with that, I'll let Sarah go ahead and run with it.
Okay. Well, Chairman and council members, thank you again for the opportunity to talk with you today. We do have a brief presentation, and then we would be happy to answer any questions that you have about the study. So for our presentation, we wanted to share a little bit of background about the study, and we have been working on gathering kind of baseline conditions, what we're calling relevant conditions within the corridor. We have prepared a report that is posted online, but I wanted to summarize some of the key points from that report with you today. And then wanted to share some of our next steps, just looking ahead at upcoming outreach. And then we can open it up for any discussion or questions that you might have. So I'll start out with a little bit of history of the study area, and Jacqueline touched on some of this already. But back in 1996, a final environmental impact statement, or EIS, was prepared. And at that time, that decision document did not contain a lot of details about the design itself. So the Montana Department of Transportation and Federal Highways and the CSKT decided to prepare a supplemental EIS, and that was completed in 2008. That supplemental EIS, what I'll call the SEIS, looked at the portion of US 93 from Post Creek Hill to Ronan. And since then, a number of projects have advanced, and kind of Jacqueline touched on some of this. There have been a lot of challenges within this corridor just relating to constructability and costs and impacts. And so with this study, this feasibility study, we're trying to identify those risks and constraints up front so that MDT is more prepared before moving forward with the project. So the SEIS did identify a preferred alternative for the 9-pipe corridor. And we're looking at this portion of corridor from what's called reference post or milepost 40, which is at Gunlock Road to the south. And then to the north, Brook Lane, associated with reference post 44.5. So on your screen, it's that red portion of the corridor. And through that portion, the preferred alternative would be a 2-lane undivided roadway similar to what's there today. However, it would have widened shoulders. There would also be wildlife crossing structures placed throughout that portion of the corridor. Also a separated bicycle and pedestrian path, which we know was very important to the public and to the tribes. And this segment then would connect to a 4-lane divided roadway to the north of Brook Lane. And then to the south, there would be a northbound passing lane. And the decision in this 9-pipes portion to keep it just as a 2-lane was because there was a desire to minimize impacts, recognizing that there are so many wetlands and sensitive resources. The decision was to keep it narrow here and have passing opportunities to the north and to the south. So with our planning study, we are looking back to that 2008 SEIS, and we want to verify those baseline conditions. We are relying on a lot of the information that was collected, but we are also supplementing, and we're gathering some new data in the field and relying on any new available data. We want to look at that preferred alternative and make sure that it's viable, both from a constructability standpoint, but also looking at impacts and costs and trying to minimize that as best we can. We may consider minor modifications to the preferred alternative if we can minimize impacts and costs and if we can better accommodate wildlife. And then lastly, our study, we're hoping to support some of those future project development decisions that Jacqueline was talking about. So once a project hopefully advances, that this study could be used to support that. And we're using kind of a hybrid approach. There are quite a few planning elements. We're incorporating environmental considerations and then some preliminary engineering components. So that's a little bit of background about our study. Next, I wanted to move into some of our key findings from the relevant conditions work that we've done. And I'll start out first with traffic. So we know that traffic volumes are one of the key reasons that improvements are desired in this corridor. And on your screen, you'll see 2 little blue dots. These are locations where MDT collects traffic volumes, and they are averaged over an entire year. And so that gives us annual average daily traffic, or AADT. And we were able to look back historically, and this chart on the right-hand side looks back to 2001. So looking at those traffic volumes to see how things have changed over time. And at the time of the SEIS, it was projected that traffic volumes would grow at 2.8% per year. That actually hasn't happened in the last 20 years. There was a little bit of a dip kind of in the middle of this time period. And we know part of that at least is because of reconstruction projects that were occurring on US 93. So traffic volumes did drop. But over that 20-year period, we're seeing fairly steady traffic volumes and a small amount of growth. What we did was recognizing that there's a lot of fluctuation and it's hard to have a crystal ball about what might happen in the future. We projected 3 different scenarios, a low, medium, and high growth scenario as to what might happen in the future with these traffic volumes. And we used that projection to help us understand and evaluate traffic operations. Traffic engineers use a concept called level of service, or LOS. It's kind of like a report card with level of service A being the best conditions and level of service F being the worst. What we know is that based on traffic volumes today, the highway is operating at level of service D, as in dog. So fairly poor conditions. Over time, as traffic volumes are projected to increase based on the work that we've done, we think it will degrade to level of service E, so get worse. And this is certainly a continuing concern, and it's part of the focus of this study. Excuse me. So in addition to those MDT traffic volumes, RPA also collected traffic data. We set out 3 different cameras in the corridor, and we also laid down traffic tubes that helped collect speed data. And I'll just point out a couple of key findings from that effort. On the chart on the right, you'll see these are daily traffic patterns, and the different lines indicate the different camera sites that we set out. So what we found is that traffic volumes grow in the morning and kind of rise pretty steeply around 6 a.m. and then grow throughout the day, with the peak really occurring in the evening, about 5 or 6 p.m. And this happened at all 3 of the sites that we studied. We also saw that truck volumes were fairly high, ranging between 7 and 8% in the corridor. That might sound small, but it's actually a pretty large percentage compared to similar facilities across the state. So we know there's a lot of truck traffic on this highway. And then we also looked at speed. So the posted speed limit in this portion of the corridor is 70 miles per hour for passenger vehicles, and it's lower for trucks. But we found that people mostly are obeying that speed limit, and the data we saw was within 5 miles per hour of that posted speed. So next I want to turn to safety. We also looked at crash data in the corridor, and we know this is a very important concern. And again, one of the key reasons that MDT is focused on potential improvements here. We had the benefit of being able to look back at the 2008 data and then compare that against data that MDT has collected more recently. So on the left-hand side, we have a chart showing crash data that is from 2015 to 2019, so more recent. And we circled that first bar. We just wanted to point out that wild animal crashes are a very high percentage. They're at 33% over that time period. So we know that conflicts with wild animals are a real problem. The other thing I'll point out is that as we were comparing from 2008 to now, or more current, there are more crashes happening per mile per year. So more frequency, however, they are less severe. So back in 2008, 5% of crashes involve fatalities. More recently, it's been 1% of crashes. So that's a good trend in terms of the severity, but still too many crashes are occurring. I'll just point out too that head-on crashes have reduced during that time period. So 6% due back in 2008 and 3.6% more recently. So I'm going to turn next to the land use and right-of-way information. This is important for us to understand kind of the context of the corridor as we're looking at these potential improvements. And the figure on the left-hand side of your screen shows management and ownership of land based on different color coding. So we know that tribal property, federal and state property is scattered throughout the corridor. That's the gold, dark blue, and kind of lighter blue colors. And it's a little bit maybe deceiving because they're broken out in those different colors, but we know most of those lands are managed for wildlife conservation. And I have a later figure that will show kind of all one color, how those lands connect for wildlife. There are 12 private landowners in the corridor, and those are shown in the lighter gray colors adjacent to the roadway. When it comes to right-of-way, the SEIS said that a minimum of 160 feet was desirable in order to accommodate that preferred alternative. And throughout most of the corridor, that right-of-way is available. There are some places where the right-of-way is narrower, and we've added some arrows here to point those out. So down near the Nine Pipes Lodge, the right-of-way varies from about 100 to 130 feet. And then to the north, closer to Crow Creek, the right-of-way is about 140 feet. So those are areas of constraint that we'll need to consider as we're looking at improvements. We also looked at soils and geotechnical conditions. So this was an area that was of pretty great concern in the Post Creek segment to the south. We wanted to take a close look at soils to make sure that any alternative we were proposing would be constructible. What we found is that there are primarily soft soils, so a combination of clays and silts and sands. They are soft. When we talk about dense bearing layers, that would be bedrock or really solid gravel that could support foundations. Those are pretty deep, about 50 to 80 feet below ground. We did find that minor liquefaction would be expected. So liquefaction means that certain soils have a tendency to behave like liquids in an earthquake event, and they can become really unstable and can damage a foundation of a bridge, for example. So that is to be expected. Groundwater is about 10 to 15 below ground, and there was no evidence of artesian conditions identified. And that's really good news because artesian conditions were found in the Post Creek area where water was just springing up out of the ground. So overall, better conditions in this portion of the corridor compared to Post Creek. And although there are some challenges, they can be mitigated and addressed. We also looked at floodplains, and we compared floodplains from 2008 to what we know today. And mainly we're just looking at the portions of the corridor that are crossing the Nine Pipe Reservoir and the Crow Creek floodplains. And there's kind of a mixture there. So at Nine Pipe Reservoir, there's about 200 feet of the highway that crosses the floodplain. That's actually a reduction from 2008 of 150 feet. And then up at Crow Creek, about 675 feet of the highway crosses the floodplain. And that's an increase since 2008. So it's helpful for us to know just the most updated information about those floodplains. We did note too that existing culverts at Crow Creek might not be adequate to convey high water. So we have heard instances where water overtops the highway, and that's potentially a problem with those culverts underneath. We looked at wetlands in the corridor as well, and we know this is a very important and sensitive resource. So we looked back at the boundaries that were delineated for the 2008 SCIS, and we went out in the field and looked where those boundaries may have changed or where new wetlands now occur. And our biologists found that there are 3 new wetlands, just less than 1/10 of an acre, that are occurring, and they're mainly roadside ditches that have grown since that time. So back in 2008, there were 82 wetlands identified in the SCIS. There were only minor changes to some of those boundaries for about 26 of those wetlands, and the remaining 56 were unchanged. We had some minor changes in classification of wetlands and what's termed jurisdictional status relating to the Corps of Engineers, but pretty similar conditions to the SCIS. Next up, I want to touch on wildlife, another very important resource I know to the tribes and to resource agencies. We did identify 2 species of concern that have the potential to occur in the corridor. Forster's tern, which is a bird, and then a bald eagle, of course, and nesting and wintering individuals have been observed near the corridor. We know that deer cross throughout the corridor, and they are most represented in carcass data. So both MDT and the tribes collect carcass data and indicate what species has been collected. And the figure on the left-hand side of your screen, those little green triangles, that's where carcass data was collected, was identified. The purple dots indicate the wild animal crashes. So if we think back to the safety slide, that's where all those wild animal crashes are occurring. And you can see that it's spread really throughout the entire corridor. A lot of deer are crossing. We've heard from the tribes and from resource agencies that there is concentrated wildlife movement near the pothole area, which is really our entire Nine Pipes corridor, plus near the Crow Creek riparian corridor up at the north. We've learned that there's high grizzly bear use in the corridor, and especially near the Crow Creek area, a lot of activity in this portion. And they're crossing between the Nine Pipe and Kicking Horse reservoirs, and so they end up crossing the highway. And there have been more mortalities from vehicle collisions, and that's really increased quite a bit in the last 20 years since 2000, and even more so since 2010. So we know this is a very important issue, and that's part of what we're studying, is how to accommodate these wildlife movements and what kind of structures and where they should be placed. So lastly, cultural resources. We have another team working with us that is helping us identify important cultural resources. There were 3 specific resources identified. First, the Flathead Indian Irrigation Project. Multiple canals are considered historic. There's an old stagecoach route that's considered historic. And then lastly, what's termed the Nine Pipe Cultural Property, which is really the entire kind of area and landscape. It's considered a traditional cultural property just because of its unique qualities and being so environmentally rich and valued. So we know really the entire area is traditional and culturally valued and sensitive. Government to government consultation is ongoing. So MDT, Federal Highways, and the CSKT are consulting on this study. And something that's coming up later in April, we are going to schedule field tours with the CSKT Preservation Office and also the culture committees. So we make sure to share information with them and hear their input and any concerns that they have. So that brings me through the relevant conditions. I'll touch just quickly next on next steps here. So I mentioned that we have prepared a relevant conditions report. That report is available online. It's posted on MDT's website, and we encourage you to take a look at that report if you would like to dive into the details. The information that I shared with you today is just kind of a high-level overview of some of those findings. From there, our next step will be looking closely at the roadway and the pedestrian and bike pathway. We want to make sure that we're identifying the alignment in a little bit more detail than was provided in the SCIS, so we can start to identify impacts. And we'll also be looking closely at structures and wildlife crossing accommodations. From there, we will estimate impacts. So we'll be able to come up with right-of-way acreage that would be impacted, or wetland impacts and associated costs. We will identify a set of screening criteria to help us make decisions. So if we're looking at two different modifications, we want to be able to recommend one of those over another. And then ultimately we'll evaluate the preferred alternative in those modifications. So that's where we're headed with the feasibility evaluation. I'll just point out our schedule here. So we are in this middle kind of bubble here, working on that feasibility evaluation. We have had resource agency coordination, so involving members of the tribes and federal and state agencies. And we have another scheduled agency meeting on April 13th. This is going to be an in-person meeting this time. So we're meeting at the Nine Pipes Lodge for kind of an office discussion. And then we're going to be taking a field tour and looking at some of these specific locations, mostly focused on the wildlife crossing spots with those agencies. I mentioned the cultural field tours. Those are going to be happening later in April as well. And then we're targeting broad public outreach later this summer. So our goal is to complete this outreach, and then we'll be preparing the final report. There will be an opportunity for the public and agencies to review that report, probably in the fall, September through November time period. We'll put that out for public review. So with that, that brings me to the end of the presentation, and I just wanted to point out contact information. So Vicki Cernich with MDT is our project manager, and then my colleague Scott Randall at RPA is the consultant project manager, and we encourage you to reach out if you do have any questions that come up after today's meeting. But we'd be happy to answer any questions today as well.
Thank you, Sarah. That's a really nice presentation. Any questions for? No? Bing, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you for coming in and giving this presentation to us. It's been a long time coming to get this project done. But, you know, like you talked about that one area from Allentown to Highway 212 there, with all the accidents right through there. There's quite a number of accidents through that little piece of road, that little stretch of road there. And you always have people stopping in between those two ponds. They're picking up a turtle and putting them in the, off the road, taking them off the road, putting them in the ponds there. Is there going to be places so those turtles are going to be able to cross in between them two ponds? Because that does cause those cars stopping there, picking them up, causes some accidents, you know. And I think we've had probably, I've counted 5, maybe 6 crosses between that area, that little stretch through there, you know. And it's a good piece of highway through there, but still it's just, you know, with the matter of the accidents going through there, I don't know why there are so many in there, you know. But you know, turning off, going up towards Chef's Ranch up there is really a concern. Because when you're going south or going back south, traffic stops right in the middle of the southbound lane, and you've got those cars that coming across there going like lickety split, you know, and that you always see somebody just slamming on the brakes, skid marks and everything else through there, you know, but it's quite a mess right through there, you know, and I was just wondering, you know, what your intentions are, because I know you're probably not going to be able to widen that out through there with those two ponds, you know, so I just, it's a concern, you know, of all the mishaps that's happened through there.
Councilman Nat, thank you for your comments and your questions. And we've heard similar comments from some of the tribal representatives that have participated in our study. Whisper Means is working with us, and she's mentioned kind of exactly what you're talking about, that people stop on the highway and try to help turtles across. They care about the turtles, but they're causing a safety concern themselves by stopping. And this study is incorporating recommendations from the SCIS to accommodate wildlife crossings, including turtles. And so there are a combination of culverts, large size culverts that would direct turtles across the roadway underneath. Plus, we're also looking at several bridge structures, larger, that would certainly accommodate large mammals, but also would be beneficial for turtles. And I think in the area that you're talking about, there are a couple of culverts that were proposed at the Nine Pipe Reservoir, one closer down near Gunlock Road, and then culverts at each of the larger kettle ponds. So hopefully that would address some of the issue with the turtles.
Yeah, and then in addition to that, we've got that Eagle Pass Trail Safety Project that's adding that turn lane. And that turn lane would be perpetuated with the final reconstruction project. So when it's reconstructed, we're not gonna pull it out and not put it back in. Obviously, there's a need for it, and so it'll carry forward with the reconstruction.
Go ahead, Pete.
Follow up too on that area there just below the Allentown there, you have the church there too. And people going north, that's turning off to go over to the church is another issue. Because you have traffic backed up that's heading north, you know, going over to the church there too. And that's quite a little hazard in there too with that, with them guys turning off right on top of that hill, you know.
A really good comment, being I'm not sure how, you know, that access got developed at that point. I mean, it seemed like there was some line of sight issues for a large facility like that on the crest of the hill, but it was granted, it was built, and it does contain some safety issues. That particular was a concentration of churches that just gathered into one, so the congregation became larger through the combining of 3 or 4 churches into one in that new location. But it's outside of the scope of this one, but it's just to the south. But it is a safety issue. And I guess that would be in part of that Post Creek Hill farther south. But I don't know, Bob, if you have anything to add to it.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that, Mr. Chairman, that is the basically the north end of the Post Creek Hill project. So we'll be addressing that as part of that project. And I apologize, I'm not, at one point, I know we had talked about providing an access road to that church, where the approach, we were going to push it further north and then build an access road paralleling 93 back to the south. I don't know if that's still in the plans. It was something we had talked about, recognizing the challenge of having that turn right at the crest of a hill with very limited, like you said, the northbound left turn movement has got very limited sight distance. So, but we can get back to you on that, what that looks like.
Any other questions for Sarah or Vicky or Jacqueline or Bob? in looking at the details here that reference the Johnson Pond, so now I'm refreshed on that, so,
Did you get that full email?
yeah, I did.
Okay. Let me know if there's any follow-up questions or if you need any other additional
No, I
information.
just, there's one thing I couldn't recall it, and so that helped me, thank you.
Yep, and I did also include in that list of links, there is a link for this study as well.
Other comments? We look forward to the turtle crossings. Turtle fences, you know, I think I could step over that, but I don't know. Some days I wonder. Yeah, the grizzly bear mortalities have been significant in this area. It's unfortunate. And a lot of the bears, you know, get hit and they go a long distance before we find them. And it's not real clear evident that it might be a cause from a vehicle hit. You know, most of the commercial trucks are the ones that just drive by. I mean, they nick them and they don't care. So the big semis are the ones, you know, usually impact with the car or small vehicle, passenger vehicle. We know about those and they stop, and obviously they do, but the commercial traffic is very concerning for wildlife. And the increase in commercial traffic in this particular zone with all the wildlife lands and landscapes. And I mean, it's such a unique landscape being a kettle region for Montana. It's very unique and it does require special provisions. So I appreciate all that. And any more information you put together in this supplemental information. So it's really behooves the project, behooves the area and wildlife in general. Thank you. Anything else? Thanks for coming in. Appreciate it. Okay, Jen, do we have any other items for the agenda? Wow. I think we are preparing for the quarterly tomorrow. Go ahead, Martin.
I have a couple appointments tomorrow, so I may either just Zoom in or I will come in, stay for a while and then leave and Zoom. So I apologize. These are just, yeah, Fridays are usually my busiest days and I neglected when scheduling these appointments. So
It's okay. It's only 4 times a year. Put them in your calendar. No. Okay, accept the motion to adjourn. Motion by somebody? Motion by Jennifer. We are adjourned.